Um, as we have seen when we go to the grocery store, our normal everyday selection of food is not always there. Um, it could be eggs, which of course, if you have a property that you could have your own chickens, you would eliminate that problem. And if you are a gardener, even if you are not a gardener, it is relatively easy to start just a few things in containers. Alan Ritter wishes to join, Cheryl. Alan Ritter's in the waiting room. So give us a second. We'll add him. All right. Good morning, Alan, if you can hear us yet. So by having your own garden, at least during the warm season, you can supply yourself with some of your own food. So I'd like to introduce with you here Wendy Rosen. She has a talk to give us. You'll be able to join in. Wendy, do you want to do it live as we go, or do you want to wait and have a question and answer portion?
I think we'll do question and answers at the end.
Okay.
This way, if I cover the material along the way, it'll ensure that hopefully I can get everything in.
Okay. Well, you want to give us a little bit of your background first, or how do you like to start?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Wendy Rosen. I'm an educator and a writer. I taught elementary school for many years, and I taught in many experiential and educational frameworks as well, including many environmental education venues. I was a staff educator at the New Jersey Museum of Agriculture before it sadly closed, unfortunately, many years ago. And I've run nature programs at day camps and overnight camps. And it was in one of these positions when I was directing a program at a residential camp that I really grew very interested in sustainable agriculture and sustainability in general, but particularly agriculture, because we started a farm as part of our camp program. And it really took off and became a very beautiful model. And that really, for me, was a turning point in my work as an environmental educator to focus on sustainable agriculture, and over time became very interested in community gardening. So I had this dream, I developed this dream to create at some point somewhere my own educational farm. And this would be a model where it would be a working farm, but it would also be a teaching farm, and it would bring people in to our site to learn all about sustainable growing and sustainable living practices. There would be a teaching kitchen, there'd be a yoga arts kind of component to it, a really beautiful holistic kind of model, really portraying what, life could be if we were to live these values and teach and practice and learn these values. And I called this Everyone's Farm because it was really for everyone. So, and you probably read about this when you read the overview for today. So about a year ago, I had an opportunity I found a site not far from where I am in New Jersey that would have been a perfect place to house this. It was a farm that was for sale, and it came on the market just took me by surprise. I happened to find out about it and quickly scrambled to talk to my folks, my people in my circles, about how we could potentially purchase a farm. This would have needed to be a cooperative kind of effort. And long story short, it didn't pan out for a lot of reasons. But that experience taught me that model in itself wasn't sustainable for me and for my cohort to purchase and to run. And this all transpired at the same time that I was finishing my master's degree in a graduate course I took was called Sustainable Leadership, really factored into my learning experience through this, and I realized that the model itself, for all the reasons it wasn't sustainable, created a paradigm shift in my mind, and I completely flipped the model on its head. So instead of having the idea of creating this beautiful place in, you know, an idyllic setting where people would come to learn, I realized that a lot of people are not going to be able to actually take advantage of that, especially those people who live in areas that are, you know, surrounded by cement and pavement, and, you know, don't have the means to get to a place like that. And so I changed this. So instead of having a place where people would come to learn all this, we would bring all of these teachings into every community everywhere, because that's really what we need to do. And so I still call it Everyone's Farm. It would just be creating our spaces everywhere into more sustainable, green, growing places. And that there's no reason why we can't grow food in, you know, in everywhere where there's space, even in urban settings. And this isn't a new idea. You know, I learned in my research that this is happening in a lot of places, as you've probably found as well. So I've been working on developing this for about a year. And of course, about 6 weeks ago, or whenever all this started, because I know we're all losing track of time, you know, this idea just, you know, it was the only thing I could think about, because I quickly saw how this crisis we were living was going to affect our food, and food supply, and food security, and accessibility, and all of that. And, you know, I was thinking, oh my gosh, Victory Gardens, they need to come back. And then sure enough, you know, articles started popping up, and now they're everywhere. I mean, Miracle-Gro has commercials about Victory Gardens on television. You know, this is all we're talking about, which is a great thing, because it needs to happen. So that just added, you know, jet fuel to this idea that I have been developing, and wanting to just share this possibility with others in you know, any way I can. And so I did a webinar about a month ago, maybe now, Dave, or 3 weeks, again, losing track of time. And that's where I met Dave. And so he invited me here today to share these thoughts with you. So, so I'm really glad to be here. So the goals for Everyone's Farm, for this initiative, are to foster a connection between healthy food choices and wellness, how gardening is an exercise activity, the positive effects of supporting locally grown food on the environment and individual and global health and the community. It would be done, of course, the format needs to be virtual now, but ideally through ongoing hands-on educational workshops about organic gardening and composting and food preservation, with the idea of building an awareness and appreciation for living in sync with the seasons, and the activity cycle of the workshops would reflect this throughout the year. And in doing all of this work, it would be really building community through cooperative, interactive activities that nurture core values such as empathy and trust and responsibility and perseverance, which of course now more than ever. And you know, all of this being done through hands-on multisensory activities that nurture this awareness of interdependence with each other and with the natural world, and our responsibility to care for it. So that's the vision. And what I'd like to share with you next is something that I learned in my graduate work, which is a little known model for how to implement this idea in our communities through something called community weaving. And this is a change model that was not specifically designed for gardens, but it's applicable for this model and in just about everything, really. So if you will indulge me, I'm going to share some highlights from my notes from the work I did in this class and what I learned about community weaving, just to explain it to you and to give you a sense of its origins. This model grew out of the desire to move. It was developed by a single mom who recognized that there were flaws in a system that was failing her and her children. And she was trying to get from a place of just getting by to a place where she could be truly thriving. So she gathered her neighbors and she shared her story and her vision. And she launched a holistic, inclusive, cooperative, synergistic, community-based network. And its purpose is to acknowledge that we are all in this together, and that to share our knowledge and our skills and our resources with the goal of supporting one another so that we can all thrive, and both individually and as a human neighborhood. So this group formed as a result of parents and neighbors coming together, and they met regularly to share their stories and to pool their resources while identifying topics that were affecting their lives. And this led to the participants acquiring new skills and learning about local resources that could provide support and taking on projects that made improvements to their community. So each participant was a valued member who made their own unique contribution. Over time, others in need were referred to the group. And so in wanting to provide more intensive support in one-on-one settings, they created a network of what they called family advocates. And they were specially trained and qualified to serve in this capacity. Foundational to its mission was the cultivation of diverse and meaningful relationships. And weaving practices began with establishing partnerships with organizations that overarch the unique diversity of their community. And the key to how this works really can be summed up in one word, which is sharing. Sharing included, but was not limited to, interests, skills, stories. Stories are very powerful. Their experiences, tools, technology, clothing, furniture, community garden space, childcare, I mean, you know, you name it. And the model drew everyone in, and it helped people to find purpose, and it fostered a sense of belonging, which is so essential and core. We all need that. This is just an inherently sustainable idea, and it's a model for how the world should be. So I want to share a story with you from this book that I read for this class. Very big book called The Change Handbook. Loved this book. There was a lot to read. I learned a ton, and this is where I learned about community weaving. And I'm just gonna, if you give me 2 minutes for a little story time, I want to read you a story that really illustrates how this model can change lives. So get comfortable. I don't know where you are. I'm in New Jersey and it's rainy and miserable, so it's a great day to curl up with a story. It's very short, it's a paragraph. But I'm going to read it right out of the book because I can't say it any better. So a local hospital called a community weaver instead of Child Protective Services when a single mother abandoned her colicky baby in an emergency room because she was overwhelmed and at her wit's end. So an example of how a web of support is interwoven in this scenario is illustrated in her story. The hospital connected the young mother to a community weaver who assessed the situation over the phone. The community weaver matched the young mother to a family advocate volunteer living nearby who is a retired nurse, loves to garden, and is feeling lonely and depressed. Her family, excuse me, I need this.
I think we all need it.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Her family, for whatever the reason, was not nearby. The community weaver asked her to provide respite care to the single mother by babysitting. So this gave the retiree a sense of joy and great satisfaction and connection. While babysitting, she notices the empty lot next to the mother's home and discovers it is for sale. This is a true story. She taps into the resource treasury of the community weaving organization that by now had become more established and had financial resources, and connected with somebody who knew the ins and outs of community gardening. And they approached an agency that writes a grant to purchase the vacant lot and start a community garden. The nurse is now doing what she loves, gardening, and the young mother brings her children over to help in the garden and to visit with her friend who they now call Auntie M. So if you can just imagine for a moment, if community weaving was not part of the societal fabric here, and what would have happened to that single mother and that baby? We know what would have happened. Child Protective Services would have come in. The baby likely would have gone into foster care. They would have lost their family ties. The mother may have even had, I don't know what would have happened to her legally, if there would be any legal consequences of what she did. But you realize the scenario would be very negative. So this is just a beautiful example of how community weaving can help everybody, and understand that, we all have these needs, and sometimes the system does fail us and we are overwhelmed. But when we come together in a very conscious and intentional way with this purpose, then we can change lives. So I love that story. I think it's a very powerful story. This is all about much more. This community gardening idea is much more than just physical sustenance from food. It really is also about social nourishment and sustenance. And we realize this in how gathering around a table and just eating together is an intimate experience, and how this act forms and nourishes and sustains relationships. And this is also where empathy grows. And we need empathy more than ever. But the question came to mind a long time ago, in my experience, when I was directing that Camp Nature program, in how do we teach kids, at the time for me, it was how do I teach my campers to care? And this question came about because we had a huge litter problem, and kids were literally just trashing the camp, which didn't really match the values of this camp. But for some reason, there was a disconnect. And, we had experiences where down on the athletic fields, you'd have this area set up where, like hydration station, where you had, big jug of water and cups and a trash can next to it to put the cups when you're done with them, these paper cone cups. And this was just one example of how there was so much litter all over camp, but kids would throw them all over the ground. I mean, surrounding this nutrition station were cups on the ground, even though there's a trash can right there. For some reason, they could not be bothered to throw them in the trash can. They just didn't care. They threw them on the ground, and this happened all over camp. And it was so frustrating, especially to my team, because we were all about, the environment and taking care of our space, our natural space, all our spaces. And to see that was really disheartening. And my staff and I began to talk about, how we can get kids to care enough about their environment to take good care of it. It took me years to answer this question, but eventually what it came down to for me was that, and this is just my theoretical takeaway, it's not based on any empirical research or anything. My experience was that when we built, actually I created a model for this. I'm going to pull this up for you and share my screen. Bear with me one second. All right, here you go. Where'd it go? That didn't work. Hang on. Okay, can you all see that? Commitment to change of mindset. Dave, can you give me a nod if you can see it? Great, thanks. Okay, so for me, my experience was it began with awareness building, from the bottom up. And when we created opportunities for this through our teaching, that led to kids forming an emotional connection and having an emotional reaction to their spaces. So, learning about nature, the woods, just all kinds of, everything we did, and heightening their awareness about the natural world and our relationship with it, began to forge this emotional connection with it. And that led to empathy, the ability to care about it, which then enabled a commitment to a change of mindset and behavior and actions. And we did see a difference. This was over the course of several years, where once we identified the problem and then figured out how to address it and hopefully see a result, that did happen. So I feel that, this awareness building needs to happen communally right now. I mean, I've been doing this work for a long, long time. And when I was sort of at the beginning of my teaching career, teaching this, I'd bring things up in conversation with people, and they'd kind of look at me like I had two heads, like recycling, like why bother? Endangered species, who cares? I'd be scratching my head like, how can you not care? But that was the case. And of course, over the past several decades, we've seen this change of mindset occur, largely due to environmental education really kind of coming into its own, but also sadly because the condition of our world, and people are starting to get it because you can't ignore it anymore. We're in a different place, and I feel that we are in this crisis that we are in. Whereas for me and for, I'm sure you, because we do this work and we have this awareness already, I think we saw going into this before, it was I could not have imagined that we'd be where we are now, even though this started to unfold. And, I was already worried about food, and I was, thinking in global terms. Still, the way this has manifested has just spun my head. It's really quite unimaginable and surreal in some sense. And so we're all kind of grappling with this acute situation and this collective trauma. And so even for us, understanding this is this is bigger than all of us, and you know, we can talk about that in metaphysical terms and all different terms. But I feel that collectively, the response that I've seen is people are really getting it in terms of what matters. And that comes back to these basic needs that we have that we just take for granted, or have taken for granted, or have maybe taken for granted in how we've met. And it's kind of forced everybody to be in the present. It's forced everybody to be in their own spaces. You know, in some ways we are kind of living the way we were living before cars were, you know, just part of our lives. You know, people didn't have the ability, the mobility to move around much, and we pretty much stayed in the spaces where we lived, you know, without all of this mobility, and that's been taken away from us right now. And so in a weird kind of way, we're living in the way we were living, you know, way back before we had all this mobility, yet we have this technology that can connect us. So it's a really interesting sort of juxtaposition there. Regardless of that, there's definitely a sense amongst, I think, the masses of, you know, just kind of what matters the most right now. And that really brings it right home to sustenance, you know, and that's why we do what we do. You know, no matter what we do in this world, it all comes down to being able to put food on our tables at the end of the day. And we are really no different than any other species on this planet, in that we all need to sustain ourselves and to nourish ourselves. So this idea, this model for this farm, I think is just needed more than ever. And, you know, it's my hope that they would be able to be implemented, you know, everywhere through awareness building and understanding that it has a tremendous power. I think that when we grow, it connects us to nature in a very special way that enables us to appreciate the natural world, especially when you're growing something that's ultimately sustaining you. And as we can see from the story that I shared earlier about that mom, how gardening has a very healing, regenerative essence to it. It can be a very healing activity, both on an individual level and on a community level. So for all of these reasons, this is something that this is why I've been, you know, talking about this more than ever. And I've been fortunate to learn that there's a lot of this work going on right now across this country, but it's also going on internationally. There's a wonderful resource that I learned about. It's a cooperative garden commission that is doing this work really everywhere. And the idea is to, again, help everybody become more self-reliant and to be able to grow some of their own food the way we did back in the early 1900s when Victory Gardens came about, so that we can help to secure up our food supply and provide some of our own nourishment. And it's, you know, interesting, the evidence of that is, I don't know if you've seen, ever come across this in your just what you've learned about what we're going through during this time, but seed companies are selling out. People are catching on to, you know, the need for this. And so whereas seed companies, I'll just give you my quick story, an example of what I learned, because I had ordered some seeds a few weeks ago to get my garden going, and the order was delayed, and it was concerning that I got an email that was a little bit confusing, and I wasn't sure they actually had my order. So I called the company and learned that whereas they would get typically an order of like 60 orders a day for seeds, they were getting orders, 3,000 orders a day for seeds. it had increased exponentially. I mean, wild. And this is happening, you know, across the board. So this is, you know, evidence of people kind of waking up to this idea, which is beautiful. I mean, it's not, obviously the reasons are not, you know, that we find ourselves in this situation is awful. But it is, just by virtue of what we're going through, creating this awareness amongst the masses of, hey, this is something we could be doing and should be doing right now. So I want to share a visual with you right now of this community weaving model. So I created this something you probably are familiar with, the Web of Life. This is a model, but it's also a teaching activity. It was one of my favorite things to do when I taught. And in case you're not familiar with it, I'll just give you a quick overview. You sit in a circle. So I would sit my students down in a circle, and we had a ball of yarn. Everybody would have an index card with whether it was an animal or a plant or an element like sun, air, water, earth, and everybody would be holding a card. And I'd start the ball of yarn around with, who, if I was, say, a turtle. As a turtle, who in the environment do I need in order to live? So I might toss it to, say, water, and we'd have a connection now between us. And then the person who was holding the water card would toss the yarn to somebody who they had a connection with. So maybe that was fish, because a fish needs water. And we'd go back and forth, and you know where this is going. We have this beautiful web at the end to see how all life is interconnected and interdependent. And so I created a model for the community weaving idea based on the Web of Life. So I'm going to pull this up for you just so you can take a look at it. And hopefully it's kind of legible on the screen. I made it as large as I could. So bear with me 1 second while I share the screen. Okay, can you see that? Thumbs up, Dave? You can see it? Good, okay. So if you look closely, I'll try to zoom it in a little bit, make it a little bigger. Okay, so this is basically all aspects of a community. At the very center, you have what's called the community coordinator, and this would be a position that somebody would need to hold to help create the structure for this community weaving model and organize it. But you can see how everything fans out and is connected to everything else. You've got, neighbors, agencies, organizations, businesses, houses of worship, schools, and then, aspects of our lives like recreation, services for childcare, the elderly, just interests, experiences, tech, skills, stories, again, very powerful, shared space, all kinds of resources, tangible resources, and how, through this idea, this model of, connecting the community, in and out, throughout all aspects of it to support each other. So let me just back up here for a second, get my bearings. So this is what I feel like life and living should be and must become about if we want to thrive and not just survive. And we have been surviving for so long. I mean, granted, survival is not new. I mean, it's been the story since the beginning of life. But we are an innovative, creative, and resourceful species, and we've learned a great deal. Some of that, unfortunately, has been, you know, has not been, I would say, it's put us in peril. You know, we need to balance our innovative capacity and our creative and inventive capabilities with, you know, without destroying the land beneath our feet. I mean, there's no other species on the planet that I can think of that actually does harm to its own environment. And as human beings, I feel like in some ways we need to relearn how to be human and what that means, you know, defining what it means to be human and how to live alongside each other, you know, in a cooperative, peaceful, creative, and not destructive manner. So, you know, nothing is driving this truth home more now than what we're experiencing. So I just want to share with you some quick ideas of what can be done in a community space to implement this idea. Lots of times I'll hear people ask me, you know, I live in an apartment, or I don't have land, or I don't have a lot of space, or I don't even have a balcony. How could I possibly grow anything? There's a lot you can do in containers. There's a lot that you can do in just a sunny spot in, you know, next to a window. So, you know, there's all different levels to this. But again, in the community weaving model, we'd also be sharing spaces. So, you know, somebody who had a porch and somebody who didn't have any space could combine their efforts together and share spaces in that sense. So container gardening is a big answer to a lot of those questions we get about, but I don't, you know, I'm in a more urban area. Creating a seed library. In my town, we have these little libraries on people's lawns in their front yards. It looks like a mailbox kind of, and it's a little enclosure, and they're book swap spaces. They're little book libraries. So if you have a book that you're done with and you want to just put it out there for someone to take as they're walking by, and you know, that's the purpose of it. You would just, you know, put your books in there that you're no longer interested in and that you want to swap and share. And we have those all over town, and people do that. And we could do the same thing with seeds. We could create these seed libraries on our, you know, on our lawns as well, you know, in an enclosure where people could just put out seeds, have them labeled, and we can swap them that way. Cooperative block gardens. There's a beautiful model in, they were called allotment gardens, and this was in Germany. They basically looked at their little spaces that were around their living areas and their garages in a new way, and created growing spaces and gardens. And those garages became planting sheds, and over time, this created a patchwork that basically connected everybody and the land. So with everybody creating their own little plots, it created one large area of gardening, and it became a recreational space. So people not only grew their own food, but they met there, they gathered there, they did recreational activities there. And so I'm imagining a block, right, where you've got backyards, you know, butted up against each other, where you can do the same kind of thing, and you can share tools, and you can share know-how and seeds and resources and all kinds of things. So that would be like a cooperative block garden idea. Workshops on indoor and outdoor gardening, planting, transplanting, seed saving, composting, permaculture. Permaculture is, you're probably familiar with it. I just want to share one of my favorite designs from permaculture, and this is something called an herb spiral, and it's a design that can be used in a very small space. My yard is 50 by 100. I live in a semi-urban area. Don't have a lot of space. I have a 10 by 10 garden area, and then lots of containers. And so this is a wonderful model. I call it a smart garden because I'm going to just pull it up so you can see it while I describe it. Bear with me. Here we go. Okay, so this is called an herb spiral. It's about 1 meter to 2 meters, really about 2 meters wide and about 1 meter high. And the design is created by rocks configured in a spiral that go from the top down, and that creates pathways in which to grow herbs. In this particular one, I planted this with my campers. They were about, I think, in 6th grade. We have about 24 plants in this space. And so you can grow a lot because you're just using space so efficiently. You can grow a lot in a very small space. But what I love about this garden is how it employs gravity, which is, of course, a permaculture idea, and using a naturally occurring entity to work in your favor. So the herbs that grow, or I should say, require the least amount of water, are planted at the top of the garden, at the top of the spiral. And then the plants that need the most are planted towards the bottom. So as you water it and the water drains, everything gets what they need. So the plants that need the least amount aren't going to miss that water that's draining down. The plants that need more are going to, of course, lap it up. And this was the garden at the beginning of the year, of the summer, I should say. And I will share with you what it looked like at the end of the summer. Oops, hang on. There you go. Same garden. So you can see how amazing it became. And we harvested those herbs. There's all this basil over here. We made pesto in the camp kitchen, and the kids loved it. It was really a wonderful, wonderful thing to do with them. And so that's something you can do anywhere. So let me just go back here.
That is an amazing difference.
Right? Yeah, it's so powerful. I really wanted to show you the photographs because I know I described it in my last talk, but I didn't have the photographs up and ready, and I really wanted to be able to share them because it's a really powerful little model.
The idea of using the gravity feed, I guess is, for lack of a better term, gravity feed, is wonderful because you are conserving water.
Right. Yep. That's exactly the purpose. You're right. And it's really efficient. There's something else I just want to describe, and I don't have a picture for this. And even when I Google this, I can't find a lot. It's something called the Gaia Mound. Has anybody ever heard of a Gaia Mound? A Gaia Mound. It's so just imagine. So you dig a hole to plant a seedling, and you layer. What you do is you layer ash, like from your fireplace or whatever, but it doesn't have to be ash. It could be compost. And then you put on top of that food scraps, vegetable scraps. So instead of putting them right into your compost bin, you put the food scraps right in the hole. So carrot peels, onion skins, celery ends, whatever you've got. And then you put more soil on top of that, and then you plant your plant, and you water it, and you let it grow. But what happens is it's like a mini intense compost pile, because that food, like the carrots, the onions, the celery, all of that still has life in it. That's live food. It's not processed, it's live food. And even though these are scraps and it's no longer in the ground, there's still energy in it. There's energy in the carrot peels, there's energy in, everything. Yeah, that's kind of it. And what happens is as the plant takes and starts to grow, it actually absorbs the energy from those still living food scraps. I want to say living because they're out of the ground, but there's still life. There's still energy in those food scraps, and it helps the plant grow faster and stronger and is more prolific. So it's a very cool, again, permaculture idea. So that's a Gaia Mound. So these are all things, just again, know-how that we can share. You can do, in my town, we have every fall, in September, which is looks like it's not going to happen this year, we have an arts festival. And as part of the arts festival, we close down Main Street, and there's a street fair, and everybody's there, vendors, artists. But we have open studios, so artists invite the public in to visit their studios that are in their homes. And it's wonderful to be able to go into an artist's space and hear them talk about their work and see what they do. And it's just, it's a beautiful thing. We could do the same thing with gardens. We could have seasonal garden tours where you could have this in the beginning of the growing season, like now, where everybody's just getting started, and we talk about where we are right now in this process of beginning of the growing season. And then you could have it, and in the summer when it's in the middle of the growing season, you can have it as often as you want, really. And then you'd have it again in the fall when it's harvest time. And so you'd see the different stages of growth, and share that, with each other. So you could visit each other's garden spaces and learn from each other. Again, it's all about sharing and relationships and sharing stories and experiences and know-how and tools and all of that. There could be off-site, farm visits to learn more about farming itself, gardening itself, as part of this, these experiential things that we could do as part of a community garden setup. So that's, kind of the nutshell version, I guess, of what this is all about. And I think now, I'd love to open it up to questions and dialogue, and, hear your thoughts. And, we can talk for the rest of our time here together. Oh, I just wanted to mention foodscaping. Foodscaping is the new landscaping. It's basically, again, not a new idea, just creating your yard, taking out your lawn, your high intensive water needing lawn, and replacing that with growing food. You can have beds of whatever. So foodscaping is a really, really fun, and again, if you Google that, there's a ton out there on how to just convert your space into a place where you're providing providing food for yourself, and if you have enough to share with the community, or however much you have that you can feel you can share. So I'm going to stop there. I could keep going, but I'm going to stop there. For your thoughts and questions, and go from there.
Where do you see, what kind of communities do you see your plans working with?
Can you repeat that? I didn't.
What type of communities do you see your plans working with?
Everywhere.
Everywhere? Okay.
No, I mean this
yeah, it's a basic community.
Urban, rural, especially urban. I think that it's interesting. When I ran this nature program, we had a lot of kids from the city, from New York City, at the camp, and they obviously, they see very little green, and it was really, really cute because we would, we grew all kinds of things in our camp garden, and the kids, I still vividly remember how some kids, picked a cucumber right off the vine and ate it standing there, and a tomato and chives, and they just these were like pre-teens, the age and everything. They were just like, wow. I mean, they were so moved, and it was so moving to watch that, how they said they never tasted anything like that. You could see the connection for them unfolding, and it happened right before my eyes, and it was a really powerful thing to see. So, because urban areas are just, naturally more cut off from the natural world because they're urban, and you've got, lots of cement and very little green, if anything. This is a very, very powerful experience. And I think it also is surprising to a lot of people that you can do this in a city. And it just creates a connection that people probably thought they'd never be able, they either never thought about at all, or that could happen for them just because they see themselves as more cut off and not part of that world, the natural world, that it's just not part of where they are, but it can be. So I think this is especially powerful in urban areas. And it's happening in a lot of places. We don't have time, but I'll share with you, there's and you can Google this, there's a town in England called Todmorden, Todmorden. I can put it in the chat box. Actually, I can put the link in the chat box for you. And this is, hang on. There you go. This is a town that, you know, had the same vision. I mean, you know, I didn't invent the wheel here, or reinvent the wheel. This is happening everywhere, and I've just been talking about it a lot because I want to bring it here. I've seen this, and I'm so inspired by it that I want to bring it here. And this is a town that said, you know, they got it, and they said we could be growing food everywhere, like all these spaces where you have, you know, shrubbery in the main town, and it's just whatever decorative, you could be growing food there. We need food, and it's a space to grow it. So they started this garden, this community garden, and they now grow food everywhere. It's for anybody strolling by who sees a little sprig of basil and they think they could use that in their dinner that night. It's for everybody, and it's this whole model created this culture of kindness in the community because they all share, they recognize the same, you know, they all have these same needs, and it's become a really beautiful place to be. They grow corn outside the police station. I mean, they just grow it everywhere. So, so that's a really great example. I'm going to give you another link too. This is the German allotment gardens that I was talking about before, and you can just, you know, go on this and read about it because that's also, it's just a powerful thing to see. I did not do it justice at all when I described it to you earlier. I'm a little cognizant of the time, and I know you will have places to go, so I didn't want to get into it in too much detail, but you can check it out for yourself. So there's that. And yeah, so I see this happening everywhere. I mean, to me, it's also very, I mean, it is so awful with, I know we're all in this place of trying to grasp where we are, what's happening, what the world is going to look like when we come through this. And I know there's going to be a discussion later today about what the new normal could or should be. But when you think about the job loss that is, you know, part of the fallout of this crisis that we're in, to me it seems simple. Now, I'm not a politically minded person. I'm a teacher. I just see everything through a teaching lens, and I think everything, you know, this is like, I could come up with a lesson plan for this, and it's very easy, but I know it's not because there's systemic things that make everything more complicated. But look, we all need food, right? We had food insecurity issues big time and a terribly broken food system before this happened. And so, you know, now it's obviously much more dire. We need food. We need jobs. Create jobs, growing food. Like, to me, it's just, you know, that's what we should be doing. So, you know, I think that, yeah, so I'll stop there. Questions, other thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I liked your presentation. You know, I think you have a great vision. Certainly, you know, I'm all for it. I have a garden. My son has a garden. You know, we're building his garden better, and you know, community gardens is like a fabulous idea. In the inner cities, gardens like the best idea ever. Yeah. You know, and they are happening. And it, you know, so your plans, some of the things you're talking about, it is happening, and your communication helps that. So keep on keeping on.
Thank you. That's the idea. It's really just to kind of share this and you know, get the idea out there and get people talking about it more and realizing this is doable.
It is doable.
Really,
I'm with you. We are with you. Believe us. We are with you.
Thanks. So I
watched a video last night that was the history of the 1918 pandemic. And one of the fallouts, besides, we don't have to get into death and all the other stuff, but what was happening was everything from the farm to the table broke down in the chain. So the first thing that broke down was that the farmers themselves were getting sick and in some cases dying. And so they weren't able to even harvest the food that would go to the table. Then if it was being able to be transported, the people who did the transporting couldn't get it to the warehouses. The people in the warehouses weren't being able to work. So the food in the warehouses was there, but it was rotting. And then finally, you'd have to get it transported to the final markets. And then the people at the markets weren't able to work because they were sick and ill. So every single step in that chain from the farm to the table broke down. But if you had your own garden, you have that control as long as you have sun and water and nutrients.
Yeah.
And
Dave, you're getting lopsided. That's, well, the Victory Gardens, that's part of that. And Victory Gardens keep it all working.
Could I say a word?
Yeah, please. I'm anxious to hear your thoughts and questions.
Okay. Sorry, I was just out selling some produce, but I sell produce. Maybe not as a living, but as a pretty sizable hobby. And what I've seen as far as the supply chain goes is that the market has plenty of produce, and even the fragile stuff is still being harvested. So I'm still seeing strawberries, I'm still seeing blueberries, I'm still seeing lettuces. So at a reasonable or more than reasonable supply load. So at least right now, we're not seeing a breakdown in the supply lines. Now, I do know classic historical examples of what caused the Black Plague, which was a disruption in confidence in currency in 1394, which was a banking issue, which caused commerce to be interrupted years later, and the immune system for the large areas of the European continent was disrupted because they didn't have anything to eat. So they were starving, and the Black Plague came along and said, oh, geez, here's all these people with depressed immune systems. Overall, I think that we're seeing that our needs are not being met by the present system. And what that means is they are offering us a product and it does not meet our needs. And so that is basically an opportunity for us to create the products and the outlets and the community that it's not that they can't, it's not that they won't supply it. It's not that we can go to them and say, oh, please give us these specifications. It's that their intellectual and their customer service capability does not include the things that we need. So I look at it saying it's an opportunity for us to create something that we need and to create networks of supply and networks of interaction, like we're doing with this Zoom channel, this 5-day festival, is not to take it as a negative, but to take it as a positive and as an opportunity to go forward with saying, oh, here's a business opportunity, or here's a community opportunity, here's a networking opportunity, here's a growth opportunity for us to, I don't want to say become political, but to take a quote unquote leadership position in driving our personal vision forward, to say, okay, government does not supply growth, does not supply fertility. They drive down fertility in general, intellectually, in the soil, in the water. They create a certain environment, and here's the environment that we're in. And so that's how I see it. Thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, you raised a really good points, Alan. Yeah, I see it again, the teacher in me. This is a giant teachable moment. And there are lessons here for us. And I think that we need to heed them. I think that we've had these lessons presented before through other.
Right. I mean, when I looked at this about, I can't remember how many years ago this was, maybe 15 years ago, I said, okay, I understand where I am in society. I understand, but now I understand more, but then I understood, hey, I need to move away from dependence on an organization, the society, that does not meet my needs. And I need to start creating a network and products to sell and ways to sell that product and ways to interface with people and ways to grow intellectual trust. And that's the path that I've been on, selling produce for, supplying produce and now selling produce for the last 4 years. And this is, we all come together and we all say, what are we going to do about this? And that's the point. The point is, what are we going to do about it, not what are we going to ask the people who can't serve us in the way we need to be served.
Right. And I think something that has driven this home for me is, I think it's going to, we're going to need to get back to living more locally. The giant scope or scale of things with just in regard to how we get our needs met, with just big box stores being an example of that. For all kinds of reasons, when there's a breakdown like there is now, you can see how that creates this disconnect from or between us and the resources that we rely on to get what we need to sustain ourselves. This has been, I'm not sure where you are, Alan, but I'm in New Jersey, about an hour from New York City, and very quickly it became so clear how difficult it was to acquire food. Now, obviously it's a risk to go out to a store, and we wanted to avoid that because that's the ideal if you can do it. But because of the population saturation where I live, just the sheer numbers of people, and obviously the extreme acute overnight need of everybody needing to acquire food, we quickly overwhelmed the systems that were in place to provide that for you if you wanted to avoid going out to the store. For instance, delivery and even pickup. And again, it's not like this in other areas, but our experience here is that it has taken a Herculean effort, and at times, in the middle of the night, to learn how to strategically find a way to be online right at the time that those delivery timetables turn over and open up so that you can get a slot for 2 weeks from now. That's kind of what it's like here. To if you want to again avoid going to the store, which we do, and again it's not like that everywhere, but that was such a glaring indicator, of how this large scale, I don't want to say corporate, but kind of, big business model that we rely on for our subsistence, when there's, again, something that breaks down in the chain of supply and demand, like this pandemic, it just left everybody scrambling, which is, I think, part of what drove home the idea of, I want to grow my own food, because it quickly became apparent that this is it's such a basic need, and we've been able to, this is how we've been living, and up until now it's worked, but now it's not, and what does that mean going forward? And it's just, I think, made us kind of reassess how we're living and how we are how we've organized ourselves economically, from a business standpoint, and of course that all factors into sustainability models, and what does that mean going forward? How should we be reevaluating how we are living, in certainly, in the face of, God forbid, a crisis of this magnitude again, but just in general, because I think this has just magnified the fractures that already existed in our system, and they seem like these giant, compound breaks, because we're seeing them through a more acute lens. And it's not that they weren't there before, but we're being impacted in a way we never have before. So
another aspect of this is when we switched over to the just-in-time model, that's why we only manufactured as much as we need, and we have a 1-week supply. Whereas if you look at the pharaohs, they had a year's supply of grain. They had enough to go through and the weather through the hard times. And I have done a variety of models. I've had my own farm since I was a kid. A small circle that was for cucumbers and tomatoes, and we picked them right off the vine. You can't get anything sweeter. Now, of course, that means it's seasonal. We've gotten so spoiled that we can get pineapples from Hawaii and oranges from California or Florida, and we can get food at any time. If I want raspberries or blueberries, I don't have to just eat them in season. In the old days, what did we do? We would jar them. We'd can them, we'd freeze them, we'd dry them. I mean, I love dried mango. We were prepared for this because we do eat a lot of dried fruit. And, whether you can, jar, dry, make fruit leather, all these different ways, you would have a supply in the off season. You can make soups with your bulk and freeze it for things that are, and then with the just-in-time model, if we can't get them to market, they can rot. But, we were finding people, probably, I would say, I'll ask the audience here, how many people have changed their diet since the pandemic? You've changed your diet? Me too. I was going to do, how about you, George? You change your diet at all?
A little bit, but because of spring, I'm eating more green, things. I've tried some dandelion baking and cooking and that type of thing, with wild
So
things.
You were eating more seasonally?
Primarily, yes, but also, I guess before this actually started, somebody got me into celery juice, and so I was doing different kinds of juicing, which I do periodically. So, I do change seasonally. In the winter I get more of a crave for more protein, that type of thing.
Well, I definitely, when we had our first Touch Mother Earth festival, one of the things that we offered for food was organic butternut squash. And we saved all the compost from that festival. I brought 14 garbage cans home. I was worried the neighbors were going to freak out. I had this huge mound. And of course, what grew out of it? Butternut squash from all the seeds. And I had a bumper crop. I had 22 or 23 squash, which are your winter keepers. So off season, we had what you're supposed to have.
Right.
And we saved those seeds and grew them the next year. And of course, we had volunteer tomatoes the next year. I mean, nature will kind of take care of your food supply to a certain degree. If you encourage it, you can go even better. I mean, the whole reason we even learned about things like trellising and the mounding that Wendy was talking about, or crop rotation and interplanting of species to bring in the beneficial insects, all of those are helpful, but it came because of observing what nature was already successfully doing.
Right.
And the indigenous people were fully aware of that. They could tell, to some degree, they could even tell if it was going to be a dry season. They saw the signs. If the creeks that became the tributaries, which became the rivers, started drying up, they knew that they had to plant something different, you know, or they had to move from one area to another. You know, that's why they lived somewhat nomadically. It's said that they basically had the off season and the rest of the year. They traveled closer to the rivers when it was summer, and they traveled further away towards shelter and stored their vegetables in caves and things. And so they got around it. And the other thing, Wendy, I'm sure you're familiar, and you probably, George, too, the Three Sisters gardening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, the basic premise of that, which I've done a lot of research and I absolutely adore. So the planting first of your corn, and as the corn gets a little bit taller, you would plant your beans. Now, the beans could trellis up the corn, and then you planted your squash, and the squash with its tendrils would grab to the base of the corn so that when the winds came in the summer, they were protected from falling over. So that helped them just to grow. But then they took that corn and beans, they could eat it fresh. They dried the corn and ground it into masa. The squash, the winter keepers lasted for months, but they also would cut them up into wedges and dry them and turn them also into a flour that could be made into a gruel. And then the beans, of course, could be boiled into a soup. So they had some basic staples during the hardest months of January and February. And you may not have had your fresh greens for 2 months, although nowadays we had Santha Cook on yesterday, who was doing another garden talk, a salad talk, right on your windowsill. And, you know, even on top of your refrigerator, she does sprouts and she puts them in mason jars and other containers. She's got fresh greens whenever she wants them.
Here we go. This is going to be my
chia. Look at it. Live example. You want to explain a little quickly what you did there?
Yeah, this is going to be chia seeds. This is just an old pickle jar. I have been saving seeds since this began because I just, again, see this even though this is something I know we do and could do, you don't have to do in life. You know, I get caught up in it, and it's just, well, I don't have to save these seeds because we're not having food. You know, it wasn't in my consciousness, but now it's like I'm just seeing everything differently, and this is a great growing vessel. So I didn't recycle the pickle jar, and now it's going to be we're going to sprout chia seeds. So yeah, I think that you're talking about how I've changed. Like, I would normally eat, I followed the principles of Ayurveda for eating and for exercising, and this springtime is a cleansing time. And so you would eat a lot of greens because you're just in a place of rebirth and renewal, and you're cleaning out, and detoxifying. And I'm not doing that because I don't have access to them the way I normally would. But I will tell you that we have about 6 big squashes in our refrigerator that came with our food order that was from a farm that I had, no say in what we were getting. We were just glad to be able to get something. I wouldn't normally be buying squash so much at this time of the year because it's more of a winter vegetable. But, you know, so that's how my diet's changed because of what we have access to or don't have access to right now. But you're, you know, talking seasonally, like berries are something that you eat in the spring when they grow and they're actually very good for what your body is going through according to the change in seasons and how it affects your body and your health. And so berries, you know, growing in the spring is right, you know, and of course it depends on where everybody lives. I mean, you know, depends on where you are geographically and what grows and what's local and all of that. Where I'm in the Northeast, this is kind of, you know, this is the season for berries for their growth, but this is the season for berries for our growth also, because it's what we need. It's not something that we typically would eat more of according to, you know, natural principles of what our body needs. You know, in the winter, you know, that's more citrus fruits, where even though that's not local, it gets complicated. You know, I have a lot of apples in my fridge because that's what came with this order. I wouldn't normally buy apples now because it's not really apple season. You know, and they're kind of mealy because they've come from who knows where and been on a truck for a long, long time. You know, so I diverged, but I know you wanted me to mention more about growing. I can show you. Sorry, Dave, what was your question?
I didn't have a question, but you made me think about what we've been doing for a while, but even more so now. So let's say you go to your Costco where everything's in bulk.
Right.
So Cheryl and I can only eat so many blueberries or blackberries or raspberries. But, you know, it's effective cost-wise to buy it in bulk. So we'll buy it in bulk. Now, as we're going along, some of them, you know, we get to the point where there's too many and we realize they're going to spoil. So the first thing we do is we take the excess and using a little agave, we make a syrup. We cook it, and the next day we either have pancakes or French toast. Now, if we still have too many, then we immediately freeze them. We do that with the bananas and all. We now have our smoothies, which, you know, Cheryl makes a great ice cream out of them. Some cut up pineapple as a base, and then adding in whatever fruit. And the other thing is people could put them in on a cookie sheet in a low oven at the lowest temperature setting and dehydrate them. You can now take those and reconstitute them. That's how when you buy, you know, Raisin Bran, or you buy the cereals that have the dried fruit, they've dehydrated them. The milk or the coconut milk or whatever you use brings them back to, you know, decent life.
Right.
So,
or you could bake with them.
You know, yeah, you can freeze them and put them into vacuum bags. You know, there may be some one-time costs to do some of these things.
Yeah.
It's, you know, people may not have space, and I totally understand. The hardest part may be simply that you do not have the garden space. Maybe you live in a condominium where they will not allow you to modify anything outside. You can't put out container garden.
Right.
All right. So then you can, first thing I would recommend is joining a CSA, a farm share. There you go. You've gotten started. Okay, I'm jealous.
So these are seeds that I'm starting on my windowsill next to my desk here, which I will transplant outside into. Well, I'll show you. I took some pictures.
So the other thing, Highland, you live in Highland Park. Why don't you talk about the farmers market?
Yeah, we have a wonderful farmers market from June through December. And that's been going, gosh, how long? Long time. And
20 years, maybe? 15
I don't know if it's
years?
that long, but it's like it's a good 15 years, I think. Let me share this with you. This is where the seedlings are going to go once they grow. This is my deck, and I just, you know, I have all these pots out here. This is mint that I dug up from my side yard that I'm just growing on my deck. And these are some just seeds I'm saving. This is to maximize my space, because I'll show you this next picture really quickly. This is a really great, also this is a great idea for how to start a garden. If you want to start a garden or expand your garden. And, you know, digging up the dirt is a hard thing to do. So this is my garden. This is my little 10 by 10 plot. Now, around the perimeter, we built Fort Knox because we have deer that they walk down the sidewalks in our town like they belong here. Like they are so domesticated. They're civilized. They walk down the sidewalks. I could come within 6 feet of one by mistake. I would never go in that close to a deer, but I did accidentally one day, and it just wasn't even phased. So this is my garden, and if you can see here, can you see my mouse? What I'm doing here with the mouse?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm outlining it. So this is a raised bed, right? It's in the shape of a U, and you know, all the weeds started, and this is the walkway around it. All the weeds started to come up. This is called sheet mulching. It's a great way to create a garden plot without digging up grass, which is so difficult because the roots are so strong. It's an exhausting job digging up the grass. And I did this originally when I created this little spot. But you know, the difference is now, what I normally do is mulch the pathways around the outside, which I'm not going to do this year because I'm not going to go get mulch, and I don't want to tax the delivery people more than they're already taxed just to get mulch to make this look pretty. It's not necessary this year. It's going to be functional, and that this will keep the weeds out, and it won't become a jungle. And I'm just not going to care about the aesthetics of it. Of course, the mulch is also good for the ground, but that's not a priority this year. So what we did was we've purchased some food from Thrive Market. I don't know if you've heard of Thrive Market. It's
no.
thrivemarket.com. Check it out. We've been very pleased. Lots and lots and lots of healthy, natural food, and it's at a discount. It's a membership, but we're going month to month right now, and it's been a way to access a lot of what we need. So we took all the boxes from our delivery, and it came with a lot of packing paper, and it basically covered our whole area. And so this is all sheet mulch now. This is going to, what I would normally do also is then take more soil, bring in more soil. We need to replenish the soil in this garden plot. It has, you know, this is probably 5 years old now since we built this raised bed, and it needs replenishing. That's not going to happen this year either. What I'm going to do, again, this isn't going to be pretty, but it's going to be functional. I have some soil in bags, and I'm just going to, you know, punch some holes here and plop my squash seeds, and I'm going to make this all an area to grow squash. And since that's not something I can do in containers, I'm trying to maximize my space and do what I can grow in containers on my deck. And then say this would be acorn squash, this would be butternut, this would be spaghetti squash or whatever, because they're going to just fan out and become huge and take over. And so this is going to be squash central here. And so instead of weeding everything, which is a big job, and we just sheet mulched it. And, you know, this is, again, a process. This year, it's not going to look pretty, but by next year, this will have composted down. It will have added to the soil. And, you know, next year, hopefully we'll remedy it to the place or point that it needs to be. What I will do is just, you know, when I plant those seeds, I'll just take some of that soil and I'll just create that little mound in those spaces. So I'll just have areas where there'll be some soil amending the actual spot where I put the seeds in. And then, you know, there's plenty of soil underneath the cardboard for the roots to go down into and for the plants to grow from. So that's kind of my, it's kind of troubleshooting right now. But, you know, it's functional and it'll work. Let me show you one other quick thing. This is just fun. So This is our old sink. It's right outside that garden. See, here's the sheet mulch. This is the screened side. We renovated our 1950s kitchen after being in the house for a long time. It was a project that we probably should have done at the beginning when we moved in, but it took 25 years, and we finally renovated our 1950s kitchen. This is the original sink. I think this is probably the original sink from our house, which was built in 1922. I love this sink. And
That's
so
the old metal sink with a
it's an old porcelain, cast iron porcelain covered sink. And so it's what we're in the process of doing is propping it up. So it's kind of leaning. You can't really tell in this picture. It's leaning back, but we're going to kind of build a little base for it. And that's going to just be another planting station. And it's just fun. It's sort of like a little garden sculpture. So you can get all kinds of I'm looking at the world now and I just like, all right, that's a vessel that has some space in it that I can grow something in it. And are we back on screen, or do you still have my?
It's you.
Okay, we looking for different places to grow in. You get creative when you have limitations. So that's just a little bit from my world. So I've got next to me, I think I have probably 18 of those little pots in all different shapes and sizes.
It's amazing what you can reuse.
One more thing.
I found the wine boxes. If you're lucky enough to find the wooden ones,
right?
The wooden wine crates that you can get sometimes for the more expensive wines. You go to the liquor store. Sometimes they often save them for chosen customers, but they have, they're not so tight that they won't drain, and you can just throw your potting mix and compost in there. I've had great success growing basil. People have taken, all kinds of things, as long as it's some kind of container that you can reuse. Right. Make sure there's drainage. That's the critical thing. A spackle bucket. I'm right this past year at Cheryl and where we live in Middletown, I've got all kinds of spackle buckets, drill some holes, and they're a really nice size for tomato plants.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm starting to grow microgreens, which I've never done, but I've always been interested in growing. And the lovely thing about microgreens is, it's basically sprouts. So like if you took broccoli seeds and you planted them, instead of allowing the plant to grow to a regular broccoli plant, you harvest them when they're just little sprouts. And the really wonderful thing about that is the broccoli sprouts, and any sprout really, contains all the nutrition that would be in that fully grown plant in a very small amount of, growth. And they're highly, highly nutritious. And they take up little space and obviously use a lot less water, so they're efficient in that sense. And you reap all the same nutritional benefits. In fact, I've read that they're more nutritious than if you were to, if you think about energy, again, like when we were talking about the Gaia mound, how, those carrot peels, even though they're no longer a carrot, there's still energy stored in them. It's live food. If you think about the efficiency of energy and you've got a little sprout that contains all of the nutrition that would grow into a head of broccoli, you can maximize, you can acquire, you can access all of that nutrition for yourself by eating those sprouts instead of like an entire head of broccoli. And you're getting, it's more bang for your buck. It's, it's more nutrition for less. And so microgreens and sprouts I just think are really cool. I've never grown them. And of course now, I'm wanting to grow everything. So I ordered some seeds, was fortunate to find some, and they make these trays for microgreens, and you can buy them, and they're plastic, and I kind of didn't want to use plastic. So I got creative, and I haven't tried this yet. So I don't know if it's going to work, but I'll show you what I did. So this is a Pyrex baking dish. And so with the sprouts, you need to water them from the bottom ideally, because they're so little and fragile that if you watered them from the top, they would, keel over and would compromise them. So watering them from underneath, so where they're going to suck up the water from through their roots underneath, is the way to do it. And then, so this is what I rigged. So this is an old aluminum pan that I punched holes in the bottom, all throughout the bottom. And then underneath the soil I'll show you. I had these from my flower vases. You have these marbles, right, that you put in the base of a flower vase because you can stick the stems in them. It helps position the stems so the flowers stay upright. And I took these from a vase, from 2 vases actually, and I layered the entire bottom of the aluminum pan with these glass marbles. And I had just enough. And then I put the soil over that. So I'm going to plant, actually today, this afternoon, I'm going to plant the microgreen seeds across in the aluminum pan in the soil. And I'm going to water them by pouring water into this Pyrex dish. And if this works, which I hope it does, the water will be accessible through the holes in the bottom of the aluminum pan. And the purpose of the marbles is to create space, some air space, so for the water to come up without waterlogging the roots.
Right.
Because you sort of need, when you grow microgreens, I've read, and again, this is just all up here, I haven't done this, you sort of need a space, like a buffer between the plant itself and the base that they're growing in. And so I figured if this was just soil, that wasn't going to work. So these marbles are theoretically the buffer. And so the water will come up through them and the plants will be able to access the water, but we'll still have sort of like a little base or platform.
Another thing that could be used would be activated carbon.
Where do you get that?
Now, I know you can get it in an aquarium store. I'm sure you can get it at, like, we don't have Agway anymore like we used to in New Brunswick, but maybe Home Depot would have it or something. But the activated charcoal in the base, even if you put it at the bottom of the soil, helps keeping the soil sweet so it doesn't get, anaerobic action.
Huh, that's good to know. Activated charcoal?
Yeah, activated carbon, whatever way you want to call it. Don't use charcoal from, like, for the grill that has chemicals and processing in it.
Yeah, I wondered. Okay. Thank you. Anyway, so
and I would imagine that you could also use perlite, but not vermiculite. Well, no, wait, perlite gets kind of mucky. No, yeah, the white, it doesn't break down.
That used to have asbestos in it. I don't think it does anymore.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
I doubt it.
I can't imagine that's still allowed, but I still feel I get a little like this. I have this in my soil. Now this is organic soil and I'm, trusting that the company, which is supposed to be reputable, is doing it right. But I still get a little squeamish with this little white stuff.
Well, one thing we are very fortunate now is places like Home Depot. Sorry, it's 1:30. Our alarm just went off. Am I still there?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I just froze my picture, but that's all right. So, with places like Home Depot, you have the ability to get things that are certified OMRI, which is Organic Manufacturers Resource Institute. I forget what it stands for, but if it's got the OMRI label, then it's been certified as organic, and so therefore you can safely use it and feel good about it.
Good to know. Thank you.
In fact, when they were developing the organic standards roughly 20 years ago, that was one of the things. I was at the Rutgers Extension Service, and NOFA all had members meet at Rutgers, and we talked about developing the standards, because it used to be you could get compost in a bag that contained sewer sludge, which contained toxic metals. So it wasn't safe, or it contained all the leaf
Right.
greens and mulch that had pesticides in it. So
Right.
nowadays we can at least find it in quantities that are affordable. A nice sized bag of organic from Miracle Grow even has it. So, it's
Yeah.
$1 more than the other bag, but $1 is way worth your health.
Right. Yeah, that sludge was scary when we learned that that was happening. There was sludge going into materials.
But does anybody else have questions for Wendy?
Hi, I have a comment. This is Beth.
Hi, Beth.
Hi, I joined the discussion a little later, but I just wanted to mention that I grew up very urban, in an urban setting, and I came to suburbia when I got married. It's been so helpful to me. Maybe 10 years ago, I joined our community garden in East Brunswick, which was created very much, the model that when I came into the discussion that you were sort of talking about. I kind of learned by doing. I really got an appreciation for the whole growth cycle, and you learn from your fellow gardeners.
Yeah.
I mean, I've really come far. I knew no terms whatsoever, with alternating, and I didn't even know what mulch was. And I think through that experience, I also started paying attention and going to, Rutgers Day, which I miss very much this year. And
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what I would buy plants there.
Yeah, and when I first went to Rutgers Day, I was just going for the folk festival, but then it's adjacent to the Rutgers Extension Co-op. So I feel for me, it's absolutely been, getting knowledge at different points and knowledge growing on knowledge. Like it is like almost like planting a seed in your own psyche.
Oh, I love the metaphor.
Well, thank you.
The metaphor is they're your children, they're your babies or whatever. Just the whole thing of watching it go from a seed to the little green to the first set of true leaves is amazing. People don't even know. Going back to what you were saying, that if you live in an urban setting, you see the finished product. You have no idea what it has taken to get that to you. And when I was in Somerset, I had 2,000 square feet, and I would bring people, everybody that came over before we even went inside to talk or wherever we were going to do. I always gave them a tour of their garden. And so if they came, say, every 2 weeks, they got to see the progress from my vision of this plant that's 2 inches tall to now it's so tall I have to stake it because it's falling over. And I'd say, oh, could you help me hold that so I can wrap the twist ties around it? And then the next time they came, they would see a tomato that was still a little green, and they go, that's what it looks like? They only saw red tomatoes. And then the next time they came over, I'd say, oh my God, I got 2 tomatoes. Here, take a couple, but you have to eat one now. And they would say, well, don't we have to go inside and wash it? And I said, I don't use any pesticides. The rain has taken care of that. And so they would take a bite of their tomato and they'd say, how come that's not like the ones I get in the store? Well, the stores are grown in a hothouse, or they're gassed with acetylene gas because they're shipped green to the markets. Or when my asparagus would pop up, I'd pick one right as it popped out of the ground and I'd give them one and say, chew on it. And they go, oh, don't you have to cook it? Oh, no, it's sweet when it comes right out of the ground. And they'd say, I never tried that before, because the ones they get in the market are probably a week or so old.
Yeah. Beth, thank you so much for sharing your experience. We're neighbors, by the way. I'm in Highland Park.
Well, I'm now in Middletown, but I'm still a neighbor.
You are still a neighbor. We're all neighbors. But yeah, so, and Beth, I actually didn't know East Brunswick had a community garden. That's really neat. Good to know.
Yeah, they do.
I really appreciate
that,
sharing your personal experience with what you've learned through that, and how it's just, enabled you to, appreciate it and what it's meant to you. So thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for this talk. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. So, yeah.
So we've been going for 2 hours.
Wow.
Is that right? Amazing.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
You've inspired me to get my small greens going. I have that as like a backup food supply, and a lot of sprouts and a lot of different kind of bottles and machines, and I'm gonna get back into it.
Awesome. I'm excited to hear that. Yeah, I mean, you know, I didn't have any formal training in this. I grew up, my parents had a garden. I didn't come into this though until midlife, you know, my real passion for it, my interest, and I'm self-taught. And so it's just about sharing experiences and resources and talking to people. And you know, when I did run that nature program and we did start the farm, we brought in specialized staff to team with us to do it. And I learned a lot from them. So it's just about, you know, it's just about networking, community, relationships. It's what everything comes down to. And so I just, you know, I love the metaphor of a garden. I think that it's, you know, again, it has tremendous power to inspire, to connect, and to heal on every level. And that's what it means to me. And you know, stories like the one I shared earlier, like that mom, and you know, there's just so many stories like that everywhere. And stories are very powerful, and sharing them, coming together like this, where I'm just sharing, this is my story. This is just kind of where I've been and how it's evolved for me to the place I am now with this work is my story. I appreciate your interest in listening. And the more we do this together, I think the greater the potential to do what we talked about earlier in terms of really creating the new normal that we have to consciously and intentionally create going forward from where
Beautiful.
we are now.
So listen, folks, if you would like to continue the discussion, make sure you're part of Touch Mother Earth NJ nonprofit. You could also, in the chat, put in your email.
I'm going to put in, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that we can get it to you guys. More chances to continue the conversation.
I'm going to put in my website.
Beautiful.
You can email me through my website, but I'll give you my email too, just so you can have it directly. Please feel free to stay in touch, to be in touch if you want to continue the dialogue or have any other questions. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to, you know, be in touch going forward.
Hey, Shaka George has joined us. Do you have anything you want to say before we end the meeting?
No, just thank you to Dave and Wendy and Callie and Alan for all participating, and Beth. It's a good team effort.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dave, for the opportunity.
This has been recorded, so we'll be able to have access to it again later.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. And everybody, take good care. Stay well.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.